Good morning, afternoon slash evening, everyone in all the time zones that you are at, and welcome to the event States of Control, Who is in Control, by Talk Curator Collective, who will run this event right after I'm done with this brief introduction. We begin, as always, by acknowledging that the Weisman Art Museum is located on the traditional and contemporary land of the Dakota people. We aspire to honor and respect the indigenous peoples past, present, and future by incorporating indigenous knowledge in our work and establishing meaningful reciprocal relationships with the carriers of indigenous knowledge and with communities. I am Boris Oicherman. I am CND&J Ehlenfeld Curator for Creative Collaboration at the Weisman Art Museum on the Twin Cities campus of the University of Minnesota. I curate the program of the Target Studio for Creative Collaborations, which supports artistic projects that cross disciplines, institutions, sectors, communities, cultures, and geographies, pretty much like this one. Before we begin, I would like to thank the voters of Minnesota, first of all, for voting today and for supporting the operational budget of our museum through the funds from the Minnesota State's Arts Board. The Target Foundation for funding the construction of the Studio for Creative Collaboration that I curate. And thank you to Cindy and Jay Illenfeld for the endowment that pays my salary here. I'm grateful to my colleagues at the Weisman Art Museum for supporting the program for creative collaboration that I lead and for making this event happen. When speakers share their presentations, I recommend you choose Fit to Window option from the view options at the top center of your Zoom screen to make sure you see the entire presentation. If you require live transcription, please choose that option at the bottom of the Zoom screen. And the last note, this event is part of the Election Day program of the Weisman Art Museum. I would like to invite you tonight to the America Election Comedy Night curated by New Yorker artist Wafa Bilal. The details for that are on the website. Now we'd like to invite Maria Veit and Anna Bitkina of the Talk Collective to lead the event.